so sorry.
Oh, wait, I have to make sure I catch up with you in New York.
Yeah.
I think we should go down in order. Okay. So
Are you in the
and then close.
so you know that, David, don't you? I'll make sure these guys know.
Open here. Okay. Open here.
Is that?
Okay.
And then when you finish. Welcome, everybody. This press conference is convened by the Global Forest Coalition and the Biomass Action Network of Environmental Paper International. My name is Peg Putt. I'm the co-coordinator of the Biomass Action Network. This Biomass Action Network is comprised of 283 CSOs across 59 countries. Today, we're calling for the exclusion of big biomass from the global renewable energy target. That target is for dramatic expansion of renewable energy, and we want to affirm that such expansion is vital. I'll make a brief observation and then pass on to the speakers who will talk about exactly why this should not be in, big biomass should not be in that target. My observation is to make sure you all know that biomass burning in large-scale energy generators is equally as emissive as burning coal per unit of energy produced and is therefore no solution to the climate crisis. However, flawed carbon accounting originating at the UNFCCC by convention records biomass energy emissions at the smokestack as zero, while the emissions for fossil fuels are all recorded, and this has created a false impression of carbon neutrality. It's now my great pleasure to introduce David Tong. David is the co-coordinator of Climate Action Network International's Energy Working Group, and he is the global campaign lead for Oil Change International.
Thanks, Peg. This COP will be a success if it delivers a comprehensive energy package. What do I mean by that? I mean something with 4 elements. First, a clear, unambiguous call to phase out all fossil fuel production and consumption. But not just any call, a full, fast, fair, and funded call, forever. We say full, not including any dangerous distractions, risky choices, false solutions like carbon capture and storage or bioenergy carbon capture and storage. Fast, declining this decade, rapidly beginning to phase down fossil fuel production and use by 2030, in line with what the climate science says we need. With first step, no new expansion of oil and gas and coal, reflecting the conclusions of the IPCC and IEA. It must be fair, based on equity, with wealthy nations taking the lead, providing support for other nations, and, in particular, ensuring it is a just transition for people and communities around the globe. It must be funded. We need those countries that have done the most to cause this crisis, that have grown rich through the fossil fuel economy, to support those that have not to transition. And as we transition off fossil fuels, we need the package to identify what we are transitioning to. And this is what I'll speak to about a bit longer today. A massive scaling up in renewable energy, tripling deployment to reach 1.5 terawatts by 2050, a doubling of energy efficiency measures, and a reduction in total global energy demand, particularly amongst those wealthiest nations that currently inefficiently overconsume energy, that have grown rich on the fossil fuel economy, not in the South. A quarter reduction in total overall energy use. So that's the package, with finance to support it, and finally, protections for people and ecosystems. These must be landed in the Just Transition Work Programme. The idea that there can be an outcome on fossil phase-out and renewable energy in the global stocktake without a broadly construed outcome that protects people and communities in the Just Transition Work Programme is a road to failure. When I say renewable energy, I want to be very, very clear. Burning forests, especially indigenous or old-growth forests, for energy is not renewable. You cannot tell me that burning an 800-year-old tree for electricity is renewable. It's not renewable. When we call for renewable energy, we are calling for community beneficial, nature beneficial renewable energy. We are not calling for some broad, vague definition of clean energy that includes risky modelling choices, includes things that harm people and nature. Global civil society, through CAN International, has this year adopted a firm position paper opposing the large-scale burning of biomass for energy. Burning forests for electricity just is not renewable.
Thank you, David. Moving right along to our next speaker, we have Mustafa Santiago Ali. He's the Executive Vice President of Conservation and Justice at the National Wildlife Federation. He's a leader on environmental and climate justice and was a founding member of the Office of Environmental Justice during his tenure at the US Environmental Protection Agency. Today, he'll share details on a new study that quantifies air pollutant emissions from bioenergy and wood pellet production in the US and talk about the need to identify truly sustainable solutions for all communities, especially those that are already overburdened. Welcome, Mustafa.
Thank you, Peg. My grandmother says that when you know better, do better. The new study that was just referenced actually shares with us that it's time for us to do better, that bioenergy is not clean. Now, we have sat in meetings here at COP28, and we have heard the figures. We have heard that over 7 million people are dying prematurely from air pollution, that we literally have hundreds of millions of people across our planet who are suffering from asthma. So what sense does it make for us to contribute to that by burning our trees, as my dear brother just shared, by utilizing bioenergy? This new report, this new research shares the lesson of my grandmother when she said, when you know better, do better. Biomass burning is associated with emissions of several air pollutants that can cause harm to human health. What does that mean? We are talking about particulate matter. We are talking about nitrogen oxides. We're talking about SOx. We are talking about HAPs, hazardous air pollutants. We are talking about mercury. We are talking about lead. For those of you who may not be toxicologists, those are chemicals, those are pollutants that have significant impacts on people's bodies. Liver and kidney diseases, cancers, breathing difficulty, so forth and so on, that will be shared by folks who actually live in community and who deal with the impacts from the burning of bioenergy. We also know in the new study, the inventory by researchers quantifies emissions from biomass-based energy generation and wood pellet manufacturing. Now, if you have never been to a community where the manufacturing of wood pellets are, in many instances you are exposed to many of those things I talked about, but it's deeper than that. You know, it also talks about and impacts people's health, it impacts culture, it impacts economic opportunities, so there is no reason for us to, one, burn bioenergy or to be supporting these wood pellet manufacturings because it has significant impacts on folks. So you have to ask yourself the question also, well, you know, if we're going to transition away from coal and oil, does bioenergy make sense? Well, it only contributes 1% to our energy sources, but yet brings forward a significant amount of impacts from the pollution that it's giving off. So it makes no sense on the economic side of the equation, it makes no sense on the public health side of the equation, and that's why folks should go and take a look at this new set of research that the University of North Carolina, the National Wildlife Federation, have put together, this peer-reviewed research. I'm reminded of the words also that a system cannot fail those it was never meant to protect. When we come into COP28, when we come into the conversations with our respective governments, when we come into conversations on the county level or the local level, we have to remember that we have to continue to push, we have to continue to advocate, we have to continue to educate, and we are hoping and praying that this report will help to empower folks to have the information that they need along with the other information that's out there for us to help people to move from surviving to thriving. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we'll all read that study with great interest. We're often hearing that you've got to move away from fossil fuels because of the air pollution impacts, but why you would move to something just as bad is a bit of an open question. The next speaker is someone who speaks from personal experience over many years of exactly these impacts in some of the most disadvantaged communities in the United States. I want to introduce Catherine Egland, who's co-founder of the Education, Economics, Environmental, Climate and Health Organisation, ECO, and chair of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Committee.
Thank you, Peg. The UNFCCC must address the systemic environmental racism and human rights infractions of wood pellets manufacturing that's exposing vulnerable communities in my country, and particularly in my state of Mississippi, to horrendous deadly toxins. These wood pellets are being shipped to countries in Europe and Asia to be burned for energy, all in a misguided attempt to meet the 1.5C mandate of the Paris Climate Agreement. This underscores the climate colonialism within the UNFCCC process, and how we have fallen prey to an unjust energy transition that harms people and planet by using faulty, deceptive accounting allowed under Article 6. Our climate isn't being fooled by this trickery. Black, brown, and indigenous communities, the very same communities that have contributed least to climate change, are being most impacted. Yet it's these very same disadvantaged communities that are being sacrificed for an unjust, misleading, ill-conceived, dirty, unsafe, unsustainable, harmful energy transition. People in Gloucester, Mississippi cannot breathe. They cannot sleep because of the noise, because these wood pellets manufacturing industries operate 24 hours a day. We must transition from fossil fuels, but we must do so responsibly. We must do so in a manner that is just and does not further harm our planet or further harm our people. And I'm going to end with a quote from one of the great civil rights leaders from Mississippi. We are sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sacrificed for unjust solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next speaker brings yet another perspective on this industry. I'm pleased to introduce Kwame Kaponzo of the Global Forest Coalition, who is coordinator of the Africa Working Group of the Biomass Action Network.
Thank you, Peg, for the opportunity to share the impact of biomass on communities in Africa. So at this COP, we will continue to remind our leaders and corporate that are involved in biomass that land, water, and forest are key resources for communities. Land, water, and forests, intense biodiversity loss, intense land grabbing and deforestation are visible signs for communities' livelihoods destruction. The fossil energy system based on carbon is going to change inevitably. And as we are speaking to move away from fossil fuel to renewable energy, our leaders must understand and must put communities in the center of their decision. When it comes to energy, communities must be considered and must be consulted. So the different solutions brought by the climate talks, such as carbon markets, geoengineering, including monoculture plantations, are climate-first solutions that destroy the nature and the life of indigenous people and local communities on the ground, including women and children. So among those proposed solutions, we have biomass. And people think biomass is renewable energy. Let me tell you, biomass is not. Renewable energy is not carbon neutral. So this is very important for our leaders to understand. So biomass energy leads to human rights violation and contributes to CO2 emission as well. So African leaders are allowing biomass project implementation into Africa. The frontline communities, the indigenous people, the children, youth, farmers, and peasants are hugely impacted from it and battling to survive and protect their territories and livelihoods. Enough. It is enough. Communities suffer from eviction and pollution such as soil, air, and water pollution. According to a research report, a company involved in biomass production in Ghana will require 100 280,000 hectares of eucalyptus plantation to produce 600 megawatts of power in long time. So eucalyptus pump water in the soil. So communities are suffering from water access. So in South Africa, for instance, one of the world's leading producers of wood fiber products has access to 264,000 hectares of owned and leased industrial pine and eucalyptus plantations. So the same situation in South Africa as well. So the company is actually using the opportunity of renewable independent power producer program developed by the government to be involved in biomass energy production, situation that increase the amount of plantations, thus increase the problem of communities. Communities are suffering. Communities in Africa, indigenous people in Africa, have been sacrificed and forced to leave their land and live in unsafe environments. This has to be stopped. No biomass development in Africa as a renewable source to combat climate change. No biomass in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. In some concluding remarks, I want to take us to Indonesia. On the island of Papua, a biomass conversion by a company of previously untouched forest has led to extensive malnutrition, especially amongst the children. There's another example on another island of really dramatic effects. But here's the rub. The Indonesian government has fallen for the abatement or taken up the abatement scam. And abatement is another big issue at this COP. What is abatement of coal-fired power? Is there any such thing, or is this just a trick, a con, a scam to entrench coal-fired power? Government-mandated plans for coal-fired generators in Indonesia currently affect 52 coal-fired generators and look like going to 110. Our estimate is that at a minimum, 2.3 million hectares of forest will be affected and conversion to energy plantation. The idea of abatement apparently is that you somehow reduce the emissions of coal-fired power or abate them. And in the case of abatement with biomass, you take out 5%, rising to 10% of coal and throw in 5% or 10% of wood instead. Well, guess what? The emissions are just the same. But it doesn't show in the accounting books. It is a really dangerous scam. Our main message here today to the UNFCCC is big biomass simply should not be in the global renewable energy target. And to all those participant countries who are here, who are signing the pledge, it's not acceptable to go over to big biomass. We have some other people in the audience who also are very experienced in relation to this issue. The Reverend Leo Woodbury also lives in the southern US in communities that are affected, and if you would like to speak with him, we can make sure that that happens. And the other person is Somang from South Korea, where Solutions for Our Climate have put out a new report showing that burning biomass emits as much carbon or more at the smokestack than coal, as I have said, and showing that South Korea's emissions and analysing the emissions at the point of combustion, showing that basically there's been absolutely no benefit to the climate whatsoever. I'll open the floor for any questions. three questions. Stand. There's a microphone. Yeah. There's a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you for this. I think throughout today's session, there are many emphasis on how biomass isn't renewable, but there are still some assumptions and considerations that think that biomass is renewable around the world, and I was wondering if anybody could speak to that a little bit. Why is biomass still considered renewable?
Well, I think the simple explanation is that it seems on first consideration, if you don't really think about it hard, that if a tree grows, you chop it down, it grows back. If you think about a forest, and David here talked about 800-year-old trees, if you think about a forest, think how long it took to grow and how long it would take to grow back. And don't tell me it's within Paris timeframes. They're not going to come back by 2030 or 2050 and recapture the carbon. It can't be renewable. And furthermore, who says they're ever going to come back? The idea is to keep on logging every day and burning. And even if you stopped, with the effects of climate change and the damages to forests and the biodiversity crisis, we're on a losing wicket, and nobody's even checking what happens with the forests that have been logged. There's just this assumption that it's all okay.
Oh, I wanted to add to what you said, Peg, that also this is all based in greed. The misclassification of wood biomass as renewable energy simply because you can replant trees, but no one bothers to say that you cannot recapture the carbon at the rate of fallen trees that are 20, 30 decades, centuries old, and we don't have time. Time is just not on our side.
I think we're going to have to wrap up. There's one very quick question, we can take it, and then we'll have to let the next people have their opportunity.
I was just going to add, Leo Whitberry, that we also should be bringing up to the COP the intersectional impacts that the biomass industry is having. So in addition to it disrupting our biodiversity, our ecosystem, the health impacts on fence line communities, the increased diesel emissions from transporting this, as well as it exacerbating flooding, which is impacting farms and also destroying homes and dismantling communities. So you have Nichols, South Carolina, Sellis, South Carolina, where half the community is gone because of the extensive logging that is increasing the climate impact. So I think it's very important that we not only talk about the carbon that's being released, but also the other intersectional aspects that should be tied to the strategic development goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's a wrap. I don't know. I think they will ask you.